Good morning or afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Santa Barbara Nutrients YouTube channel. Before we get started today with this interview, I did want to mention some exciting news. So Santa Barbara Nutrients is going to be a sponsor for the Metabolic Health Summit in May, which is actually held in Santa Barbara this year. And we're very excited for this opportunity because this conference focuses on the importance of nutrition and metabolic kind of disease states and the ideas that are really circulating about ketosis and these metabolic therapies. The conference is going to be featuring some of the leading physicians and researchers around the world. So we're super excited to be part of this. And in fact, Dr. Jacob Torres, head researcher at Santa Barbara Nutrients, will also be presenting an abstract during the poster session. So some more news to come about that, but I did want to kind of highlight that right now this morning. And then we'll go ahead and kind of start with this interview today. So I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Thomas Wimes. For those of you who don't know, Thomas is a professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and he directs research in his lab that is focused on polycystic kidney disease, or PKD. And Thomas is also the president and founder of Santa Barbara Nutrients. So today our discussion is going to be circulating around why testing urinary pH is important for individuals with polycystic kidney disease. So we'll go ahead, Thomas, welcome, and thank you again for attending today. We'll go ahead and kind of start off, why is it important for individuals with polycystic kidney disease, or PKD, to monitor their urinary pH?
Yes. Hi, Alexa. Yeah, thanks for all the great questions. Yeah, why is it important? So in PKD, patients with PKD, it has been found for quite a while already that they typically have a low urine pH. So just maybe as a reminder, way back then, high school chemistry 101, everybody would have learned about what pH is. And the pH is essentially just a measure of how acidic or alkaline a fluid is, a watery fluid is. And a completely neutral pH is 7. And an acidic pH is something below 7, let's say 5 or 4. That would be, and the stomach acid, for example, is very acidic. It has like a pH of 2 around that. And an alkaline pH is just the opposite. That's a value that's higher than 7. So in urine, that could be 8, for example. And so it has been found that people with polycystic kidney disease, and that actually holds true for most other forms of chronic kidney disease as well, they usually have an acidic urine pH. So their pH, they might hover, excuse me, around 5 or so. So, and the reasons are not completely understood, but it has to do with a certain degree of what's called metabolic acidosis. So their bodies tend to be kind of too acidic. And, as I'm sure everybody knows, but the kidneys are in charge, or, one of the important organs in charge of regulating the body pH, the body acidity, alkalinity, which means if the body is too acidic, the kidneys excrete more acid, that makes the urine more acidic. And that's just what happens in polycystic kidney disease. So people with PKD tend to have an acidic pH, which usually isn't a big of a problem. But if it's too acidic for too long a time, and maybe goes along with some dietary habits that are not perfect, this can really increase the risks for kidney stones. So that's something that's also well known is that individuals with PKD have a higher frequency of developing kidney stones. And those with kidney stones also have typically have worse PKD progression. And research that came out of my lab a couple of years ago showed that you can actually make PKD worse by giving animals with PKD, by giving them essentially what will lead to kidney stones. Right? So you you worsen their PKD progression by aggravating their kidneys with these microcrystals. And these microcrystals are what starts off kidney stones, down the road. But these microcrystals are actually very, they're small, very sharp objects, if you will, that kind of like lodge in these kidney tubules and they cause microscopic injury. We found that in PKD, this essentially can lead to new cyst growth and worsen the conditions. All right, so what does this all have to do with urine pH? So it turns out that acidic urine pH also predisposes people for forming these microcrystals and being, having a higher chance of forming kidney stones in the end. And that has a couple of reasons. One reason is that certain compounds that are usually excreted with the urine, they just happen to be insoluble under acidic conditions. So when the urine pH is low, something that's called uric acid, for example, can precipitate, forms these microcrystals, and I think people with gout probably know all about it. Because the problem with gout is high levels of uric acid. So the kidneys have to excrete all this uric acid, and if the urine pH is just too low, it can cause kidney damage. So it's important for people with gout or just high levels of uric acid to make sure the urine pH is not too low. The other problem with acidic urine pH is that if the urine pH is too acidic, it will also lower the urinary citrate levels. Okay, so what is citrate? Citrate is a normal molecule that we humans all produce. Almost every cell in the body can make citrate and uses it as well. And it is also excreted in the kidneys and forms the normal defense of the kidneys against calcium kidney stones. So citrate is very important in suppressing calcium kidney stones, and it does this by essentially just capturing the calcium and preventing it from forming calcium oxalate and calcium phosphate crystals. And it just so happens that if the urine pH is too low, the kidneys can't excrete citrate very well, and we end up with what's called hypocitraturia, so with levels of citrate that are just too low. So those are kind of a couple of the reasons why a low urine pH is bad, because it predisposes people for forming both uric acid crystals as well as calcium crystals. So, and why would one want to monitor? Because you really can't tell from, and I don't know why I always get to talk about these things. So by just looking at one's urine, you can't tell if it's acidic or not. You have to measure it. It's probably a good idea for everyone to just know where they stand. Do I have a highly acidic pH or not? Do I need to do something about it?
Yeah, wow. It's a lot of information that kind of just goes back and kind of relates to the pH of urine in general, right? So there's a lot of different things that you touched on. I guess one of the questions I have is we talked a little bit about how measuring urine pH is very important and why somebody needs to measure that. Now, is there a general rule of thumb of maybe, a best time to measure or how often to measure?
Yeah, so the funny thing is the urine pH actually changes up and down throughout the day quite a bit, and it really depends what one eats and drinks. Diet has a very strong effect on urine pH. If one goes to the doctor's office and they might take a spot urine sample and measure the pH, that is only one snapshot, and a few hours later it could be completely different. So it's actually much better for people to just measure the urine pH at home, throughout the day to get a bit of a sense for what their own pattern is, right? So, it might be lower in the morning, a little bit higher in the evening, or maybe just the opposite, and it kind of depends on the dietary habits. And you would never really know about this if you only take one snapshot. So I think it's a good idea to just use some cheap pH paper and get a sense for what the patterns are. And especially if somebody changes their diet, let's say you start on a ketogenic diet, everything will also change with the urine pH. Excuse me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super important to know too. And it's, kind of all goes back to diet and nutrition and lifestyle interventions that we talk about, right? And so some people might be wondering, who've already purchased Keto Citra, they got a free kind of Aspian pH urinary paper. And I'm wondering if you could just walk through a little bit of kind of like how to use that. And that might be helpful for those who, received that with their Keto Citra, but might not really know how to utilize it.
Right. Yeah. Good question. Yeah. So, at Santa Barbara Nutrients, we're sending out, a free packet of pH testing paper, indicator paper, with every subscription. For the first order in a subscription, people get this. And people can also buy it just by itself, and it's really cheap. We're not making any money out of it. It's just a like a convenience item for customers. And so what this is, you just open this up here, and it's a roll of pH paper. It kind of looks like that. So it's really easy to use. We selected specifically this particular paper because it has exactly the right pH range to measure urine pH. There are many similar papers out there that kind of look the same, but they might have completely different pH ranges, so they wouldn't be very useful. But one doesn't have to use this particular paper. There's all kinds of other pH dipsticks available. It just so happens we selected this one because we really like all about it. And what you do is, you take a urine sample, and the best way is to just pee in a cup essentially, and then rip off about. Oops, sorry about that. This didn't work. So you kind of roll this out here. So there's just a roll of paper inside, and it's about enough for like 100 measurements or so. So I think my thing here is a little bit too full. That's strange. All right.
You haven't taken enough samples.
Yes, exactly. Well, I just took a brand new one. All right. So you just rip off a bit of pH paper here, and dip it into the fluid, and just for like a second or two, take it out, and essentially just compare the color that you get on the wet strip to the color chart here. And make sure the light is okay, right? So you don't want to do this in a dark bathroom or something where you can't see a thing. So the lighting should be good. And then one should be able to determine the urine pH, with an accuracy of about 0.5 units. And as I said, a completely neutral pH is 7.0. Probably a good urine pH to shoot for is, round about that range. So 6.5, plus minus a little bit would be great. But very often the pH can be, at the very bottom here, like pH 5 or so. And if it just happens to be pH 5 all day long, that would increase the risk of forming these microcrystals that can damage the kidneys. Yeah, and the one reason why we selected this particular brand of paper is this is just paper. You just throw it in the toilet and flush it away. There are many other products out there. There are these plastic strips and so on. They work just as well, but they're not really flushable. And because we really want to encourage people to measure urine pH throughout the day, This is actually quite nice. You just stick it in your pocket there, walk into, if you're at work, walk into the bathroom and, nobody will know a thing about it. So anyway, so that's why we
Very
like it.
convenient. Take it with you wherever you go.
Exactly.
So I know we touched a little bit about, kind of again, these dietary interventions. And so you mentioned if somebody's urine pH is, maybe 5 or lower, that can put them a little bit at risk of kind of developing these microcrystals. So I had just a question. Are there specific dietary changes that you think influence urinary pH the most?
Yes, for sure. Mostly it is the protein that people eat, and there it depends whether one eats a lot of animal protein versus plant protein. So animal protein tends to be much more acidic, and it has to do with the what's called the amino acid composition in animal protein. Animal protein is very high in cysteine and methionine, which just happen to be metabolized in a way that it creates a lot of acid that the kidney has to excrete. Plant protein sources are they have much less methionine and cysteine, and usually plant foods are more alkalinizing. So if somebody is a carnivore, heavy meat eater, chances are they will have a very low urine pH because of the high, animal protein content. That's why there's actually a lot of research out there in chronic kidney disease where researchers have found that plant-focused diets are beneficial in chronic kidney disease. So that's pretty well established in CKD, and that's actually one of the reasons why in the Renew program, maybe we get to talk about this another time. This program we have, created with fantastic renal dietitians. This is a plant-focused diet, and one of the reasons is really to prevent this strong acidification product. Yeah.
Very neat, very neat. Yeah, that's a whole nother session in itself. Really, the Renew program is great, and we'll have links below if you're interested in that and want to find out more information. I guess, my last question, just kind of going all the way back to the very beginning, and the two main components of Ketocitra are, the BHB, so that the ketone, and then citric acid. Is, kind of what you alluded to earlier, is that the reason behind why citric acid was added to Ketocitra? Or what is that specifically for? I know those are the two main important parts of that product. And so I'm wondering if you can dig in just a little bit deeper from that component specifically.
Right, yes, good question. So Ketocitra is formulated to be overall alkalinizing. So, for the experts out there, there's about 50 milliequivalents of alkaline base delivered, per day. So that helps to normalize the urine pH. So that's an important component of it. The other component is that there is, citric acid in there, and citric acid is essentially the acid of citrate, so it's kind of the same thing. And that helps to also normalize the urinary citrate levels, right? So I mentioned before that in polycystic kidney disease and in CKD in general, urinary citrate levels tend to be too low. Taking citrate in the form of Ketocitra, for example, can help to bring this back to normal levels. One could, in theory, some doctors recommend to drink lemonade, for example, right? So it sort of works, yes, you get citric acid there as well. But a problem with lemonade is, if it's just like lemon juice, it's very acidic, and it can have detrimental effects on the tooth enamel. So it can be, causing tooth erosion, if somebody sips a very acidic lemon juice all day long. And if you drink like lemonade, with sugar in it and so on, that's of course not good, because then you have a lot of sugar intake all day long, and you would actually have to drink a lot of lemonade, like a gallon a day or so, to get kind of the same level that you would get with keto citra. So that's the reason why keto citra is formulated that way. It will deliver citrate together with this alkaline load and the combination is that it helps to normalize urine pH and it helps to normalize urine citrate levels.
Okay, that makes more sense. I think that, when people think about citric acid in general, right, they do think about lemonade or orange juice and just why can't I have that instead? And so I think bringing up that tooth enamel kind of, that was very interesting. That was something that I was like, oh yeah, that could, or canker sores, right? Anything like that you don't want to be sipping on naturally during the day. And so having that as a component of the Keto Citra is really important for that. So great, that was really, really good. All right,
Yeah,
perfect.
and maybe one word of caution is as we discussed, urine pH that is too acidic, that is bad and can lead to crystal precipitation. But also if the urine pH is too high, meaning the urine is too alkaline, that can also be bad. There's a form of crystals called calcium phosphate. That happens to precipitate under very alkaline conditions. And that's actually one more reason, to just measure the urine pH, see where one stands. It's rare in polycystic kidney disease to have a too alkaline urine pH, but there are conditions that could lead to that. Everybody should, of course, always consult with their doctor, and most people have other diseases, other comorbidities that might play a role there as well. So it's just as important not to go too alkaline, right? So you don't want to go, above pH 8 or so, for example. And again, this paper will tell you where one stands.
Mm-hmm. I know we talked about, how to measure and what that entails, but I'm wondering if you have any recommendations for how somebody can keep track of the recordings that they actually have after doing that, because we want to kind of consistently see how dietary interventions change urinary pH. What's a good way of keeping track of that?
Yeah, great question. Yes, and I think it's actually, it's hard to just remember, the numbers. And I think it's much better to just write it down, have a piece of paper or a clipboard or, say like 8 a.m. pH, whatever, 10 a.m. such and such, and maybe keep track of it for a week or so, or, a few days. That's probably the easiest. Of course, you could also just type it into a phone app. There's an app called Chronometer that lets you track food intake and nutrient intake that can actually also track pH. So you could enter it there and then it, plots a trace for you. So that's I think is important. And it also lets you, have something handy that you can bring to your the next doctor's appointment and discuss the values with them. They might be very impressed if somebody actually does that. Yes, so keeping track of the values I think is important. And one doesn't have to do this for the rest of their lives. Of course, I think very very quickly one gets kind of used to what the values look like, and then oftentimes some people recommend to measure the second morning urine. What does that mean? Right, so you wake up in the morning, you go to the toilet, and then the second time, right, so the one after that, that's when you measure the urine pH. So you have sort of like a consistent thing day in, day out. That might be a good routine to do that, especially if somebody changes their diet and experiments with, let's say somebody wants to switch to a more plant-focused diet, or somebody wants to try a ketogenic diet and so on. It's probably good to keep track of that.
Yeah. And for
Yeah.
those of you who are really kind of, into Excel and keeping things like that, that may be a kind of cool way to, play around and really see the delta in your values and that change along the way too. So great. Yeah, those are really good ideas to keep track of things. Well, thank you very, very much, Dr. Lyons, for your time today. Very informative session today, and I really appreciate your time. Everything we talked about today, the Metabolic Health Summit, that link will be posted. The link to the PH paper will be posted below too. And we really encourage everyone to comment on here. If there are questions that we did not address today, more than happy to reply to those. So feel free to comment, share this video. And otherwise, we really appreciate your time today and for everyone tuning in.
Thanks, Alexa. Bye.